throughout the New Testament. And so the elder, standard term, bishop, standard term, and there's really no distinction at all between them. And then we also have the idea in here of the steward. God's steward comes in as another term that gets used. There we go. And so we have God's steward, another term, along with we have overseer, and overseer is bishop, and up here we had elder, and so they all mean the same thing. Elder, overseer, steward. This is the person who is responsible for leading the congregation, delivering God's gifts, doing all the things the pastors are supposed to do. And so then in verse 7, we had the beginning of the criteria, and then Paul gets into all the things that a pastor should not be, and we had a list of 5, and we made our way through that list. Not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not addicted to wine, not pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain. And I pointed out to you that in Greek, all of these are simply a single word with negation in front of it. The negation in Greek is me, mu, eta, so me, not, single word. And then verse 8 starts in with all the positive things. And again, in Greek, these are all just single words. And there are no commas, so these are just bang, 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 a list of things. And he comes up with a list of 7. 6 which are single words, but then 7 gets a little bit more fulsome as he gets into his 7th in the list. And that starts with verse 9, holding fast. But we have hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, just, devout, self-controlled, and then holding fast the faithful word, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we're working our way through our list of these things. So we had hospitable. We talked about that last week, and I told you that in Greek it's a compound noun, which literally means stranger lover, and that's what it means. So hospitable is somebody who loves strangers. Loving what is good, also a single word in Greek, love, good lover. Sensible, we were talking about that just last week when the time is kind of running short, and we have sensible and just, and both of those are interesting words because both of those would have been considered to be virtues in the ancient Greek world. And so even like virtues with Aristotle would consider sophrone and diakonia as being virtues. So good, sensible would mean right thinking. The word that we usually use is prudence. Prudence has a weird connotation nowadays, so it's not as good, but the idea of thinking well, on the ball, sharp, sensible. Just is our justice, giving justice to people. And then that leaves us with devout and self-controlled. And so those are the last ones to fill in our list of our virtues. So we've got hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, just, and treating people fairly. And now we have devout. Devout. And this is an interesting word because it has the sense of, kind of even translate it maybe godly, maybe be a way to do it, or another one might be a sense of holy. So in other words, reverence might also kind of capture this a little bit. So you handle yourself in a right way in things dealing with God. So reverent, holy, devout, kind of gets at that sense there. And then the 6th one is self-controlled. And as I mentioned, again, all of these are simply single words in Greek, which has the sense of like a set standard list. And that's going to have even more of evidence for that in a second here. So these are the 6 things that pastor should have. He should be hospitable, loving good things, sensible, he's got a good head on his shoulder, treats people fairly, godly, reverent, obviously it's kind of a good thing to have, and self-controlled, which fits well with one of the things he should not be, which is not pugnacious, liking to fight, all right? That shouldn't be there. And not quick-tempered. So quick-tempered and pugnacious fit well with he should be self-controlled. He's got his act together. He's not ruled by his passions. He's not ruled by, kind of these flying off the handle sorts of things. And then finally, the last one on the list is, and that's the verse 9, we have holding fast the faithful word which is in accordance with the teaching. And that's kind of a clumsy mouthful, but that's almost exactly what the Greek says. So holding fast, in other words, holding on to, got a tight grip on what? On the faithful word. And word here is that fancy big word, Greek word logos, the faithful word, which according to, which is in accordance with the teaching. And that's another loaded term in Greek, the didache, he didache, the teaching. And so that he will be able, then there's a reason for this, but this is his seventh characteristic, the seventh in the list of seven. He holds fast to the faithful word in accordance with the teaching. So what's going on with that? You would think he's holding fast to the faithful word. Enough. And then we would immediately think, faithful word, oh, what's that mean? And what would you guess? What is the faithful word? Yeah. What's that? What Paul gave them, the word, okay? And so the faithful word, we might be tempted to think, oh, that means a reference to the Bible or the Old Testament, but it's probably not, okay? That would be graphe, scripture, writing, if you wanted to say that. So when he says holding fast the faithful word, what he gets at here by word is logos, which has always, whoops, I'm mixing up my alphabet here. So the faithful word, the logos, would be the word is Jesus Christ is the word of God, but the word is essentially the truth, the principle, the spoken reality that goes out. And so the faithful word, so this is the faithful logos, this is the one that is according to the right teaching. So this is God's truth, but it's also in accordance with the didache, the teaching. So you say, well, wait a minute, is that a synonym? And it's likely not. So what's really going on here is Paul is saying he needs to be hanging on as a tight grip on God's truth, and that's kind of what I would do with faithful word, would be God's reality or God's truth, the way things are. And that's what we're getting at here. It's the faithful word. God's reality about everything, the way it is. He holds on to that, and that is in accordance with the teaching. This is a technical term, the teaching. In fact, one of the oldest documents we have beyond the Bible from the ancient world was from the 1st century, the hundreds AD, is a manuscript called the Didache, the teaching. And it was a book of instruction for how things were supposed to work in the church. Had things, even there are some liturgical things are in the Didache, which is quite interesting. Some things on ethics and other things on what we would consider doctrine. It's all there in the Didache. But the teaching. And so I really believe what's going on here with the teaching is this has to do with what we would call the tradition, or the traditio that Paul talks about other places. Or in Greek, it comes across as the paradosis, and the sense of that which is handed over, the tradition, the paradosis, the teaching. And so, in other words, this is a set standard account of the Christian faith that was simply there, and people knew it, and it came into existence already within the time of the apostles. In fact, we have the apostles, meeting together, and they're meeting in the upper room, and they're instructing people coming in. And remember, when Paul was converted, he spent some time with the apostles, and he also spent time studying. And so before he launched off on his mission, and I'm quite persuaded what is happening is Paul is learning the teaching, the didache. And remember, you didn't have printing presses. Books were uncommon. Papyrus was expensive. It all had to be handwritten. There was no printing. And so most of the teaching was done how? Orally. It was orally done. And you would learn this even when you were learning anything. It was by rote memorization. You would learn stuff. You would memorize it. And so there was this didache was essentially the set of teaching that was there. So when Paul was establishing a new congregation, he would spend time teaching them, giving them the teaching, the didache. So what he's saying then basically is a pastor needs to have these 6 characteristics. He needs to be hospitable, loves what is good, sensible, just, devout, self-controlled, and he needs to know the didache, and he holds tight. So he's not sloppy, and he's not playing games with it. He knows the teaching. So the teaching is essentially what we would call the tradition. And that comes into what we have other terms for this, the regula fide, with the rule of faith, or sometimes we call this the corpus doctrinae, the body of doctrine. All of these are referring to the same thing. These were the teachings of the church. But you need to recognize this doesn't just mean, oh, this is like the things in the small catechism, that kind of teaching. Yeah, that's there, but so are things like how to live. Ethical things would be included in that. And so are even things like worship kinds of things. It's all just part of the Christian life. How are Christians supposed to live? And what's coming through here, what should be coming here through very clearly is, so Christianity is not just a bunch of ideas. Christianity is not just stuff that you have in your head, that you believe. And we do this all the time. We tend to operate with, oh, what do you believe? Oh, I believe this. Oh, that makes you a Christian. What makes you a Christian is that you're actually following Christ with your life. So yes, it goes on with what's in your head, but it's not just head stuff. It's the whole life. And that's what comes through here so clearly. This didache was the teaching that was manifest in how you lived out your lives. And there was a commonality to this. They were all living this life together. They were all doing this the same way. It went into things like how you raised your kids. It went into things like how you planned your vacations, if you had vacations. Everything was included in this idea of the teaching. So that's what Paul's getting at here. And this list then includes with the hold fast the word of truth. So he holds to the didache, the teaching. And it's not just this random thing, but it's a set teaching. This is also why Paul can refer to the Romans knowing they've learned the same thing he teaches in Corinth, or the same thing that they would believe in Thessalonica, or the things they would believe in Cyprus. The teaching is everywhere. It's the same. And so every Christian in every place is learning the same teaching. That's how they know it's God's truth. Yep. Who wrote it? It's not like it's a written text. You see, that's the whole point you got to get here. It says this oral part of this teaching. And Paul refers to it from time to time. Romans comes close to kind of laying this stuff out. But there are times like in the book of Romans even where Paul will you can kind of, you sense a shift in how he's writing. And it's like he's quoting from the didache is the assumption. It's there. So in other words, it was more of an odd thing. It was just part of the memorized stuff that was there. And this is where things get interesting, because you start having discussions. Okay, so this corpus doctrinae, the teaching, what's in it? Well, it's God's truth, the Christian truth. And where do you read it today? Well, my answer would be Book of Concord. So pick up your copy of the Book of Concord, read that. There you have it. That's the didache. That's the teaching. You say, well, Catholics see it differently. Yeah, they do. But who's got it right? And see, the question is, who's expressing this according to what was actually taught among the apostles? And the job of the church in every age is to say, what is the apostolic teaching? And the apostolic teaching is the didache. And the whole point, I would say, is that in our confession, what we teach is in accordance with that teaching, which is why I tell my students all the time, there is really no such thing as Lutheran doctrine. There's just God's reality. And Luther expressed it well, and we follow that. But see, you should not say, well, I'm a Lutheran, we have our Lutheran doctrine, or you're a Methodist, you got your Methodist doctrine, you're a Catholic, oh, you got your Catholic doctrine. That's not how you should think about it. There's just God's truth. Then you have all these different traditions who are claiming to be able to express that the right way. Methodists say they've got it, Catholics think they've got it, Baptists think they've got it, Lutherans say we've got it. So then the question is, who's most faithful? Not which one do I like best, but who's faithful to the apostles' teaching. And that's the job of all of us to say which one's really on track. And this is where I can tell you with great confidence that I know where our Lutheran doctrine comes from. And this is also why our Lutheran doctrine was not composed in the 16th century by Melanchthon and Luther and Chemnitz and Andrea and the guys. It was composed by the church. And they're simply writing down what they had learned, what they had been taught. And that's why Luther and Melanchthon are always going back, what did the church fathers say? What was taught? What was taught? What was taught? This is what's always going on. And the differences between a Baptist and a Catholic and a Methodist, I can tell you exactly why the differences are there and the reasons for them. And it's not because they're more faithful to the long tradition. There are other reasons that come in. And we can talk about that too. But that's what's going on here. And that's why I want you to spend some I want to spend some time so you really appreciate the depth of what this teaching means and how central this was to the life of the church. It was a big deal, okay? And go ahead, Steve. Oh, you mean as far as when Paul's writing this? Well, you see, this is the whole point of the tradition. You have to be careful with this. The word tradition meant that which had been handed over. So it didn't matter that it was 3,000 years old or 30 years old. It's what they had been given. So, and so that's why Paul says, I praise you, Christians in Thessalonica. You're holding on to what you were given. Tells the same thing to the Corinthians and to the Romans and to the Galatians. This is a theme again and again and again. You're holding on to what you were given. What were you given? The tradition. It's all part of God's truth. Does that include Israel? Of course. The whole Old Testament? Of course. This is Paul's whole point. He spent time studying, realizing Christ is the fulfillment of all we had hoped for in the Old Testament. It's all God's story. That's the claim we make. So it's not like Jews have one version and there's all these different religions. No, there's one God with one reality, and Christ is the fulfillment of that one reality. That's exactly the claim Christians make. Is that exclusive of everything else? Of course it is. That's how it works. And that's kind of the heart of the very confession we're getting at here. Yes? Right, and so you would say, and she's right, there's a tradition for that. And this thing you have to get into, though, is was that tradition faithful or not? And is Mary special? No doubt. And does Mary have a special role to play? No doubt. Did God choose her? He did. Why? Well, Scripture tells us because she's his choice, highly favored. Does that make her immaculate? Nope. Does it make her have a, assumption into heaven? No. There's nothing scripturally to support that. And so this is Luther's correction, essentially, in the Reformation, is some of these ideas that started coming into the church through the tradition didn't line up with the apostles' teaching. So the question is, what's apostolic versus what is merely nice, pious tradition that came on later? And there are some things that are just nice, pious tradition that came on later, but there are other things that become problematic. And so if it gets in the way of the apostles' teaching, we get rid of it. If it's in line with the apostles' teaching, we hold on to it. If it's neither in one or the other, take your pick, whatever. Okay? And so, is Mary cool? Sure. Is she co-redeemer with Christ? No. Is she an avenue into God's grace? No. Is she born sinless? No. Was she assumed into heaven? No. So we go with some things with Mary, but not a lot of stuff. And it's also good to remember that I'm trying to remember which, the Assumption or the Immaculate Conception. I think it's the Immaculate Conception of Mary did not become actual church Catholic doctrine until the 20th century. 20th century. Yeah. 19th or 20th century. I want to say 20th. I think it was in the early 20th century. So the Pope finally decreed. The people have been believing it for a long time, but the Pope finally said, yep, that's official doctrine. Okay, now it's on. And that's how it happened. Yep. All right, good? So why do we want to have a guy who holds to the teaching? Well, Paul's got two reasons why this should happen. And the first reason he says, so that, here's why, one, he will be able both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. So, two things. He wants you to be able to exhort in sound doctrine. What's that mean? My Bible says encourage. That's a good word. It's paraklesis. And parakaleo is the word for the paraclete, the encourager, the exhorter, the one who builds up. To build up in sound doctrine. What's that sound like? What's that? What's an example of that? Preaching, teaching. Yeah, so in other words, he should know, he should be holding fast to the doctrine so he can encourage in his preaching. He preaches well. So one goal is to build up the faithful, and the other one is to refute those who contradict. what's that look like? That looks like saying, whoops, false doctrine, stop that. So both things need to be there. So he should be one who holds fast to the teaching so he can do two things. So he can exhort and encourage the faithful through sound doctrine. So he's teaching you well, and he's there also to be able to challenge those who contradict. And by contradict, you're basically contradicting the apostolic teaching. You're not being faithful. Both things are here. So he should hold fast to the teaching so he knows God's truth. And he can be able to encourage you to stay in that truth, and he can also challenge those who are going sideways or going at variance from that truth.
Is challenge a strong enough word?
Probably, yeah. Challenge is a strong enough word. Refute. Let me see what the Greek is. So he's there to encourage in the teaching those and also those who are speaking against antilogontos elenkein. It's challenge, refute, speak against, point out the error. Yeah, take your pick. All right? So those are the two things we're getting at. So how is this list relevant for non-pastors? So all these things he shouldn't be, all these things he should be, any relevance for non-pastors, or you can all just sit there thinking, cool, glad that's good for everybody else.
I think they do it the same. They have to be on guard to do the same thing.
All right. So Christians every Christian be striving to live these kinds of ways? Hospitable, loving the good things, self-controlled? Obviously. So in other words, these are excellent goals for us all. So these are excellent standards. And so I think the application here is absolutely there. Is the role of a pastor is particularly, he's responsible, he's held accountable, so we've got that. But every one of us should be striving for these kinds of things. And even doctrinal knowledge. How much doctrine should average Christians know? Not much. It doesn't matter. How much doctrine should average Christians know?
All of it.
I think a lot. Why? Why should you guys know good doctrine?
Be living by it.
Well, you should be living by it. Thank you, Jack. That's very good. So, and does doctrine shape how you live? You say, no, that's just head stuff. That's just like, things about Jesus, two natures, communion, it's just stuff in your head. It doesn't mean how you live. How does doctrine shape how you live? Well, how? Concretely, what difference does it make? So you believe that Jesus is the Son of God. You believe that communion is the body and blood of Jesus. So does that change how you live? How you raise children? What difference does it make for you tomorrow that Jesus is the Son of God and that communion is Christ's true body and blood and that Jesus is coming again? What difference does it make for what you do tomorrow? Should it make a difference? And if it should, what difference does it make? Does doctrine matter for how you live? Tell me how.
Your actions should show.
All right, your actions should show. Like what? A mirror, curve, and guide. So we have the law comes into play, showing us how to live. Okay. Yeah.
Well, doesn't it go back to the horizontal you told us about?
Yeah, I've talked about horizontal a lot out there in the world. Correct. I agree with you. So I'm just curious what you guys think. Does doctrine impact how you live your life? And I think it does. Tyler. Some might not, maybe in an obvious, apparent way. But maybe we need to start realizing that if I really believe that Jesus is living inside me, is that going to change how I operate and how I do my job tomorrow? I think it should. If I really believe that Jesus is coming back to make this entire world brand new again, is that going to change how I operate in like how much money I save for my retirement, how much I count on trying to make the world a better place? Is it going to, see, it gets deep into you of the kinds of choices you make about what's important, what things matter, about how you're prioritized. You see what I'm getting at here is if you really believe this God stuff, if you really believe this Christian doctrine stuff, if this really imprints you, it's going to start to kind of come out all over the place in weird things. Like, you're going to look at retirement differently. Because if you believe that when you die, that's it, how big a deal is your retirement? No, just think about this. Imagine if you're a person who believes that you die and that's all she wrote, there is no life after death. How are you going to look at things like retirement and vacations and free time? You're going to make it the best you possibly can because there is nothing else. Right? Because there's nothing else. But if you truly believe that Christ is going to come back and make all things new, how do you look at that stuff? It's all different. I don't have to put all my eggs in this right now basket. And so my retirement, that's not the biggest thing. What's the biggest thing? Following Christ, serving people around me, helping others to follow Christ. That's what matters far more. How you use your money. Do you need to hang on to your money to make sure that you're taken care of? Or does God promise to take care of you? See, Christians get weird when they start getting all funny about their money. I gotta hang on to my money. That's what heathen people do. Yeah, and they have no other choice. Who's going to take care of them? Themselves. Who's going to take care of you? Do you believe that? Live like it then. Show me. That's what I'm getting at here. So this is where doctrine comes into play. If I really believe it's Christ's body and blood that I received this morning in Holy Communion, and that He is in me, is that going to affect how I use my body the rest of today? And how I interact with other people around me, knowing that Christ lives in me, literally? You see, this is what I'm getting at. That's what Paul's getting at. Doctrine fills you. It's God's truth, and it just changes who you are. Changes your entire outlook on everything. And the tragedy is when Christians just look like everybody else. Do you believe this stuff or not? Well, then show me. Act like it. Live like it. Put into action. Quit holding on to your money like it's the most important thing in the world. Quit living like no one's going to take care of me except me. Well, do you have a God or not? Has He promised to take care of you or not? Do you believe that? Then what are you worried about? Come on, people. Live like it. That's what's going on here. And see, I sense that we should be very concerned about our Christian life and about our doctrine. It's not just so that we don't get led into error. Oh, that's bad. But it's also so that we actually put into action what we believe. Put your money where your mouth is. Live it, people. That's what Paul's getting at here. Is that all making sense? And so doctrine, see, I want you to recognize doctrine is far more important than just getting every box checked. There, I'm a good Lutheran. I got my boxes all checked. I learned that stuff in confirmation. I know my stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the way your life is imprinted and the way that you live and the way you function and how it just shows out in all that you live. And one of the mistakes that has happened in the church is we've made it way too cerebral. We've made it all into this head stuff. And we forget that in a sense that it's this lived out reality. That's what's going on here. Okay? Yes. It absolutely guides your character. It shapes your character. It makes you who you are. It guides you. And your character becomes part of what you do by your living. Absolutely.
Character is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
That's correct. So your character becomes your identity. That's right. I saw another hand over here. Yeah.
What do you think, Paul, when it said about what happened in our church body in the early 70s?
Yeah, in the early 70s, what would Paul say about that? It's always fun to speculate, you know, what would people say? And would he be pleased with the departure from God's doctrine? No. And I would say what was going on in the early 70s with the kind of trying to accommodate modern learning with Scripture and getting, playing fast and loose through the Bible. No, not good. You're not holding fast the didache. You're not holding fast that truth. Would he have also grieved over the division? I think so. So there are plenty of ills to go around all over the place, and not even the people who were fighting for the truth were fighting maybe the best ways always. So there was plenty of junk going around all over the place and plenty to grieve. But the holding to the word of truth matter? No, a lot. So, and how you go about that? Well, we can talk about that too. That's all part of it. Okay? Good. So, why is Paul so concerned about the men in the office? Why does he spend so much time about the things they shouldn't be, the things they should be? Why is this a big deal to Paul? Why is he telling Titus, make sure you choose good men? Why is this a big deal? They're the shepherd. Does a shepherd matter? How much? A lot. A lot. You guys know this from experience, and it always gets a little awkward to talk about, especially when you have shepherds in the room, okay? And former shepherds in the room. But we know this matters a ton, doesn't it? And we know that congregations absolutely take on the character of their leader, don't they? And so this is stuff we don't even like to talk about at the Sum, because at the Sum it's supposed to be like, no, 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 no. Any man can serve anywhere, and it's all good, and God does the work. But we also know that the character of the man in the front who's doing the preaching and leading matters, doesn't it? Okay? It matters a lot. And even the style of leadership comes through, and it makes a difference. Congregations definitely take on the character of their pastor, and vice versa to a point. But the longer a man is there, the more it becomes that reality. It's just part of how it works. And it matters a lot. And so this is one of the most important tasks I have at the seminary, is making sure that every spring in April, when we certify our fourth-year guys going out, who are going to be the new crop of candidates, are these men worthy of the pastoral office? And it's not just because their GPA is 3.8 and above. That doesn't happen. And if we were actually being honest with our grading, they'd be a whole lot, but anyway, grade inflation is everywhere. But you see, it's not, and notice in Paul's list, does it say anything about, brilliantly sharp? It's not even on his list, okay? He's got sophroné, he's got, sensible. No, but he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's not stupid, all right? But there's also nothing here about being a genius or being a great orator. That's not even there. There's nothing even here about being great people skills. Not on the list. Okay? What's on the list are things more character. He's setting an example. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He knows that word of truth, and he's holding on to it. And those are the things that matter. And so when we're thinking about certifying the guys who go out, these are the things that we should be paying attention to, because these are the men who are going to be leading the church. And what they do matters. Because if you have a guy who's leading the church who's not holding fast the word of doctrine, what happens to that congregation? Yeah, they start to wander off as well. It happens. You know it does. You've seen it. We all know it does. And so that's why it matters you pay attention. Who's the pastor? What kind of pastor is he? Is he faithful? These are things that matter. So the question now is, how does what Paul teach square with current practices? Are we doing the things that Paul emphasizes? And I would say yes and no. I think at the seminary we try hard to make sure that we're creating men who do this. And to be honest, even in the last 20 years, there's been a shift even since I've been there, because through the 20th century, things got pretty cerebral. It became kind of, we're an academic institution. Do they know their stuff? And test them on their doctrine. And if they got that, we're good. And then so far as having his family in order, that was on Paul's list, all right? He should have kids who are obedient. And we didn't pay always a lot of attention to the kind of wider things about the character of the person. We watch for that, maybe more than we used to. In my opinion, I think we should pay even more attention to that. Some people get really concerned still about, well, if you're going to have a pastor, he should have a Master of Divinity. He needs that master's degree. Where's that on the list? Where does it say anything about advanced degrees? Where does it say anything about any education besides knowing and holding fast the word of truth? So how much do you have to know to do that? Well, that's where we can have some discussions. But what's far more important is, what about his character? What about the example he's going to set? What about his way of operating? Is he a bit of a jerk? We don't need that, okay? And guys who are a little bit too full of themselves, or a little bit short-tempered, is that a problem? That's a big problem. And we've had a tendency to kind of like, those are just from personality quirks. Whereas maybe those are the bigger deal. And the fact that he's sharp in the classroom and knows his stuff is far less important. And my experience is that's usually the way it goes. Not too many congregations care about the guy's GPA. And I can tell you a few things about your pastor's GPAs, but that doesn't really matter. You see, what matters far more, no, actually I can't. I'm forbidden to do that, FERPA rules and all that. But you see, the GPA isn't nearly as significant, you guys know this, as does he hold the truth? Does he convey it? What kind of example does he give? What kind of approach does he have? Is he someone that we're willing to follow, or is he causing trouble? See, these are all these kinds of nebulous things, and that's what Paul's getting at here with his list. All right, so the authority to make a pastor belongs to, I think it belongs to God. God has the authority to make a pastor. How does God do it? Through the church. So the church becomes his means to make this happen. But it's God who's doing the choosing. And notice that in Paul's list here, who's he telling to make pastors? He's telling Titus to appoint men. And he's telling Titus, remember the criteria. Look for these things. Here's what you should be looking for. So Titus is scoping around in every congregation. Okay, who's got the criteria? This guy does. I think I'm going to peg him. So who's making the choice? Well, God's making his choice through the means this time of Titus, interestingly. Because Paul's telling Titus to do it. So Titus is making the choice. So does the church get to choose? Didn't back then. So in Crete, there's no choice. The church is not a democracy. Sorry, everybody. It's not. And we have this idea that somehow, well, no, in the church, we vote, and we all get to decide. Well, that's one way to do it. It's not the only way. Not how it went for Paul and Titus. Titus did not take a vote and say, okay, who do you guys like? You want Bob or you want Frank? No, let's vote. No, Titus just appointed. He picked. God did the choosing through Titus. So the church is not a democracy. And I would even say, I can make a lot of knots here. So the church is not a democracy. Neither is the church a business. See, it's not about who's going to grow us and who's going to bring success. That's not important either. Now, what's far more important is the teaching the truth and exhorting people and able to refute false doctrine. The church is not a business. And I'll make one more here, too. The church is not a helping institution. And you get this a lot nowadays, that we're here to help people have better lives. No, we're not here for that. Church is not a helping institution. Nope. We're here to teach God's truth and to help people live lives according to God's reality and to live in conformity with God's truth. Does that help people? Sure. That's nice. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to point people to God's reality so they follow Christ. That's what we're here for. It makes a big difference in how you operate and how you think about what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to get done. And this gets back to having sound doctrine that is manifest in how we live. All right, final thoughts or questions on chapter 1 here. Or still, we're not, I'm on this worksheet 2. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
I've been watching all kinds of television ads, churches to come and celebrate Christmas with them.
Yeah.
Great for the family, and everybody will have fun.
Yeah.
And I want to hit the TV.
Yeah, so great for the family. Everybody's going to have fun. This is what it's all about. And so we have churches who market themselves as being an aid to your enhanced life, make your life better. Great, it's good family values, and we'll all have fun together. Yeah, this is not what we're here for. It's fun. I mean, it's good for the family, but that's not what's driving us. Driving us is faithfulness to Christ. Yeah, Steve.
So your comment about the church not being out to help with the people.
Right. Yeah, that usually gets people.
So there's a lot of push for congregations for sermon events and different things.
Yep.
And there's also, I think you talk about that as a Christian, you ought to be helping others. So is it our decision, or should we do?
No, what I'm saying is the church absolutely will help people. We're kind. We're sharing God's grace. We do all that kind of stuff. But we are not here primarily to make your life better. Not what we're here for. And see, this is part of the clarity I want you to recognize. Because Jesus told us that when you follow him, sometimes it makes your life a lot harder. Didn't he? Taking up your cross and follow me, let's go die. Oh, that makes my life a lot better. See, the criteria can't be, is my life better now than it was? That's not the point. Ultimately, of course, following Christ is the only outcome that's worthwhile. It eventuates in the resurrection of the body. That's pretty great. And it eventuates in oneness with God. And even we have this confidence knowing we have God's forgiveness. And so, yeah, we're helping people ultimately. But, man, it doesn't always feel like it or look like it. And using that as the criteria can get you confused. That's what I'm getting at here. And see, this goes even to churches prioritizing, what should we be doing? What's our reason for existence? Our reason for existence is not to be a force for good in the world or to help people or to be an outreach to show kindness. That's not what we're here for. We're here to teach God's truth so that people follow Christ. That's what we're here for. Okay? That all making sense? Yeah.
First of all, in a postmodern world, it's very awkward to talk about teaching God's truth when everyone has their own.
Correct.
But what I thought of when I talked about when your question asked current practices, the reference to elders.
Yeah.
Oftentimes lay leaders, for example, we have a board of elders here.
Uh-huh.
We should be held to those same standards, but we're here more of in a support role for the pastor and help hold them accountable.
Quite right.
As they go through their career and potentially stray from.
Correct. And so you as an elder in the congregation means you are a leader within the congregation and you then work with the pastor, but you're not being described here. And so elder here means pastor, not your elder, kind of elder. And that gets really confusing. But you're right. Yes, exactly. But your job then is, as you said, to work with the pastor, hold him accountable, but also to encourage him so he can do his job better. So remind him, make sure that you're being fed, make sure you're being cared for. Can we meet your physical needs? What are we doing? So this is part of your job to make sure that your shepherd's being cared for so that he's doing a good job of being your shepherd. And so as part of the sheep you check, is he being a good shepherd? Yep, he's doing what he should do. Great. We got a problem here. That's your job. That's appropriate. And so that's part of that give and take here going on. But you should also recognize then, though, is, see, where does authority lie here? Does it lie with the pastor or with the congregation? And the best answer is neither. Yeah. The best answer is, where does authority lie? God. Yeah, God, Jesus. He's the authority. And we're all underneath him. He's the one who's calling the shots. Our job is to hold each other accountable in that task. Again, it all comes back to following Christ. All right. Good, good, good. All right, anything else? Worksheet 2, done? Great. Let's go to 3. So, we're still in chapter 1 of Titus, and we will finish it. Oh yeah, I promise you, we will. And then 2 and 3 will go a lot faster. 1's where all the heavy stuff is. So Titus chapter 1, verses 10 to 16. So now Paul has told us what Titus should be looking for good shepherds in the church. And now comes this, the last word he told them is, why? Hold the fast word of truth so you can exhort, and also so you can rebuke those who are out of line. And then verse 10 makes sense. For there are many rebellious men. Many, he says, empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, who must be silenced because they are upsetting whole families, teaching things they should not teach for the sake of sordid gain. And so there you have it. That's the bad side. That's the contrast. And so how common is this problem? Paul says there are many rebellious men. So Titus needs to be careful. He needs to pick good shepherds. He needs to pick good leaders because there are a lot of guys who aren't good. Already there, okay? So that's what we're getting at here. Verse 12 opens up a whole new problem. We'll get to that in a minute, but we'll just hear it quickly. One of themselves, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. So Paul says, spot on. That's how it is. For this reason, reprove them severely so that they may be sound in the faith. So you see, there you have this idea. Not paying attention to Jewish myths and commandments of men who turn away from the truth. To the pure, all things are pure. Then he goes on forward. All right. So what's Paul's concern? Well, he says there are many rebellious men. So Paul's described faithful service. Now he tackles the threat. And what's the danger? The danger is that the teaching can get muddled, people get confused, and they stop following Jesus. And they start following false things. That's his problem. So what is the problem with these men? He has his little list here. He says there are many rebellious men, empty talkers, and deceivers. So we have here this kind of little criteria. So the first one is they are rebellious. What's it mean to be rebellious? Rebellious against what? Yeah, the pure word. They're rebellious against God. In other words, they're not yielding themselves to God and his truth. They're not following Christ's truth. So a rebel doesn't mean he's rebellious against Rome or against the local authorities. No, it means they're rebellious against God's truth. That's the problem. So they're rebellious, and then they are empty talkers. All right, so what's an empty talker? You guys know this from your experience. What's an empty talker? Talks a lot but says nothing. Politicians are notorious for this, especially when they're doing interviews, okay? They say a lot, but they really don't say much. An empty talker. I've known teachers like this who say lots, but what's really going on there? I've heard preachers like this. I've heard whole sermons like this. Empty talkers. And so there's no content. There's nothing of substance there. All right? Then the third thing we have is not only are they empty talkers, but they are deceivers. And so they are misleading people. And so sometimes it's deliberate. But maybe, you see, being rebellious, you're just not paying attention to God very well. Empty talkers, that's just cheap. But see, the deceivers, there's something nefarious going on here. There's something deliberately nasty, trying to deceive. And there's, in a sense, kind of a progression then. There's this kind of crescendo. You start off by not paying attention to God's truth. You didn't have much to say, kind of just, blabbing, and then actively deceiving, misleading people. Oh, Christianity is nice, but there's lots of truth around other places as well, and you need to be kind to each other. This is a different world today than it used to be. This is exceedingly common nowadays when it comes to sexuality issues, where you've got, the church always taught that sex belongs only in marriage. But come on, this is the 21st century. Things are changing, and we used to think, only a man and woman is appropriate, but come on, we're learning more, and we're understanding better, and it's the 21st century, and, kindness teaches us other things. Hearing this kind of stuff? Hearing it from Christians? Yeah. You see, and so this is the kind of stuff that I think is exactly we need to be paying attention to. This is the kind of deception. So it's rebellious. Yeah, God's made his truth known. They're not that interested. So then they just start saying a lot of dumb stuff, and then they start actively deceiving. And it's always done, or often done with good motives, whatever. But Paul's even concerned about other people who have even worse motives. They're just doing it for sordid gain, looking out for themselves. Now, these men, Paul tells us, he said, you look out for these guys, the rebellious, empty talkers, deceivers, and especially those of the circumcision. What's that mean? These are these Jewish Judaizers, okay? The circumcision group. We've talked about this before. What was the big divide in the early church during Paul's life and for the next couple hundred years, or 100 years? What was the big issue? The big issue was, are you a Jewish Christian or are you a Gentile Christian? And you think, what does it matter? It mattered to them a lot, okay? And so a Jewish Christian was one who came out of Judaism, had kept kosher, had kept Sabbath laws, had kept circumcision rules, had kept all the rules of the Old Testament, and now recognized that Christ was the Messiah, and now was a believer in Jesus, and they were following Christ. Did they believe Jesus rose from the dead? Yes. Were they trusting him for their salvation? Yes. But did the Jewish heritage matter to them? Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Did a lot of them still keep kosher? Sure. Why not? They kept on doing some of that stuff because they were used to it. There's the way of life. So you got that kind of believers. Then you got the believers like Titus, who were just Greeks running around being good Greeks. And then Paul comes and says, hey, well, let me tell you about this guy named Jesus. Well, he's a Jew. Yeah, well, let me tell you about him. He matters for you too. Tells the story. The guy says, that's awesome. I want to follow him. So he becomes a believer. So are they going to become Jews to become a Christian? Oh, that's the big question. And the Jewish Christians think, well, duh, yeah. Make him a Jew, then he gets to be a Christian. And Paul's saying, I don't think so. And so this was the big divide. What about these Gentile believers who don't have the right heritage and don't have all the right practices, don't know how to be a good Christian? Then you got the Judaizers. We're the real Christians. We're the ones who did it like Jesus. And you guys, you're the pretenders. That's the big divide. It's a big issue. And so Paul is very concerned about these Christians in Crete who are primarily Jewish or Gentile. Which ones? Primarily Gentiles, okay? It's primarily Gentile believers who have come into the faith, and he's very concerned about these rebellious, empty talkers, deceivers, who are especially of the circumcision. So these are not just Jews, but these are Judaizing Christians. Christians who are saying, you better be keeping the Old Testament laws or you're not really a follower of Christ. That's who Paul's concerned about, all right? So these are Jewish, but they're not Orthodox. In other words, it's not a matter of how orthodox they are in their following of the Old Testament laws. The problem is these are Judaizers. So they're Jewish, but they're more like these are Jewish, Judaizing Christians. And Judaizing means you're trying to bring in these Jewish rules and these Old Testament laws to make yourself a real Christian. So they're not orthodox, and they're really not paying attention to the fullness of the gospel. This is the issue, okay? Now, Paul provides a few clues about the things that are motivating them. And those come especially in towards the tail end of this, where he says, not paying attention to Jewish myths. Don't do that. So apparently, these Judaizers, these Jewish myths and commandments of men who turn away from the truth. Commandments of men like you can't do any work on Sundays, and you better do this on your kosher laws, and you better do this, and you better do this, and you better do this, and all these commandments of men who have been added. And so this is where we start getting in the Reformation, when Luther says, so a priest can't get married. That sounds like a commandment of men to me, and not like one of God's truths. So this is part of the application here. Commandments of men who turn away from the truth. And then we have verse 16. These people profess to know God, but by their deeds they deny him, being detestable and disobedient and worthless for any good deed. So they're not living lives that are worth following. So a few things that come through here, these clues. They hold fringe ideas. So they've got these kinds of fringy, weird, he calls them Jewish myths. And some of these had to do with the return of the Messiah. Some of them had to do with different beliefs about certain patriarchs, about what they were doing and things like this. So these are kinds of these fringe ideas. I'll make it a little more pointed and say this is a little bit like believing in conspiracy theories. So these are your 9/11 deniers or whatever else, your Holocaust deniers, And so are there people in the 21st century who are holding fringe ideas? Yeah, we have a nice name for them. Here's the nice name for them, okay? So that's what we're kind of talking about here. These fringe conspiracy theory kooks that are out there. And so this is part of what's kind of going on here. And you got these guys with these kooky ideas, and does that deceive people? Does it get people all fired up about the wrong things? Do those people have a big influence? Do they hold people? Yeah. So this is part of the problem, these holding fringe ideas, these Jewish myths. And so while we don't have Jewish myths too popular nowadays, conspiracy theories, those popular nowadays? Those popular in conservative Christian circles? Yeah. So these things abound. And so while we might say, well, we don't have Jewish myths, this doesn't apply to us anymore, do we have people who hold on to goofy, kooky ideas and kind of fringy stuff? Yeah, that's part of the concern here. So that's part of it. We have the problem of they have good talk. They talk a good language, but they have a bad life. So in other words, their life is not matching up with their confession. They don't have any good deeds. Talk up a storm, but there's not really any life to support it. And then he also calls them worthless. And the Greek is even kind of more helpful because it's sort of like the idea of they're fake. And so there's no good works. They're worthless. They claim to be holding the truth, but we know it's fake by the results we see. And what we see are people who are not living lives of service for others. They're not dying to themselves. They're not following Christ. They're not committed to living in humility. It's a fake. It's not real. It's not genuine. It's phony. So there's no good works. That's all we know. So what impact are these false teachers having? What's Paul say? What's going on? He says they need to be silenced. Why? Yeah, they're upsetting whole families. Again, Families here has that sense of the household, okay? They're upsetting whole families. I'm going to check my Greek here to see what he's saying here. Yeah, they're upsetting whole oikos. They're upsetting whole households. Might be even a better word here. So they're upsetting whole families. Entire households are getting messed up by these people. And remember, a household was like a small business. Everybody living in the compound. Mom and dad, kids, grandkids, servants, workers, in-laws, everybody there. So you've got people who are getting misled by these lousy, crummy teachers that are running around who are doing junk, and they're confusing people. And you can see how compelling this would be. Oh, you're followers of Jesus? Great. Oh, you don't keep kosher? Wow. This is what it really means to follow Jesus. You got to do this too. And you can see people, oh, well, Paul didn't tell us that. Well, let me tell you, Paul didn't give you the whole story. Here's what you really need to know. How compelling could that be? You can see how people can get sucked into this. And so that, or the conspiracy theories. Let me tell you the real story. Like, oh, now I know. See, it happens all the time. Still even to this day, it's the same idea. Whole families getting upset. Does this happen today? You get whole families get sucked into conspiracy theories, get all goofed up? Yeah. Think about the parallels, people. Things don't change that much. The contents of the stories might change, but the reality is how these things play out, it stays the same. So, what impact are these teachers having? Whole families are getting messed up. Entire households are getting confused and getting misled. This is a problem. Paul doesn't want this. So Paul says they must be silenced. You could even say they need to be muzzled. All right? That's the word implies. Shut up. They need to be silenced. How do we do this? Throw them in jail. Now, how do we do this? You can ignore them. Sometimes that works. You can go a long way by just blowing them off, ignore them. How else do you silence them? With the right teaching, right? So you refute them. You show their errors. You do it not with the sword. In other words, you don't enforce it with the sword, but with the word. So the word rightly preached, the word rightly taught, you refute them, and you get them back on track. All right, good. So next week we'll talk about Paul's dim view about Cretans and discuss that some more. Interesting, even the word Cretan still stays with us. Yeah?
The Judaizers, the circumcision group, they're not going to be united either.
Correct.
Because there's all kinds of Jewish thought that's going on. So
that's right. It's a mess. Exactly right. It's a mess. It's not like there's one unified enemy teaching. They're all over the place. It's just like when you've got terrorist groups. They fight with each other too. And so it's just a mess. And that's why the truth keeps us where we need to be. Yes?
In your context, Cretans means people from Crete, right?
Correct. That doesn't mean a creepy guy. I know. We'll talk about that next week. It's funny how things just hang on. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, we are grateful that you've brought us to the beginning of this Advent season as we think about the coming of Christ for us, as he comes in Bethlehem and as he promises to come again at the end of time. Give us diligence as we live in anticipation of that coming, and help us to be able to live as your people, putting your doctrine into action in our lives. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Blessings on your week, guys.